Item 3 is announcements. I don't think there are any. 4, public questions. I don't think there are any public questions. Urgent items. I usually ask the Chief Constable at this point if he would say a word, and I'll do that now, if he would say a word around the coronavirus, COVID-19, and the impact that's having on the force, how the force are dealing with that, and perhaps something about the well-being of the force as well, because all these are matters of concern to us. And I think if we could just look towards the future, towards Christmas, because I imagine that's going to be a very challenging time for the police when restrictions come off a bit, and the wisdom of that is another matter. People mingling and mixing at a time when the vaccinations are still not available for everybody in quite the way we hope they will be. So that in itself is going to present further public health challenges. It does seem a recipe for undoing, if we're not careful, a lot of the good that's been done up to now with lockdown. So, Chief Constable, if you could say a word around coronavirus.
Okay, I will. I'll play Tim in a moment. ACC Tim Forbear. He'll just give a little more specifics in and around coronavirus. But if I just comment generally to begin with, of course we have now a very well developed approach together with partner agencies to manage our responsibilities together with the responsibilities of those partner agencies, principally amongst those, of course, public health experts and the like. Again, Tim can play in some of the more specific detail, but we are at a turning point. I think you're absolutely right, Commissioner, to make mention of the fact that as we enter into the coming weeks and months, happily we are seeing the rollout of the vaccines now. What I would imagine we will need to guard against is the idea that it's all over and that those restrictions which will continue to pertain over Christmas and beyond will have to stay in place, lest we otherwise, in anticipation of the impact of the vaccine, put ourselves into a really difficult place at the back end, a slap bang into the worst months of the winter. So, there will be a continuing requirement for us to do our bit in upholding the regulations, and we'll sustain that going forward. But at least I hope people will generally start to turn their mind, at least optimistically, to a realistic prospect in the spring, whereby one hopes that things start to improve really quickly, and that a lot of people use the phrase light at the end of the tunnel, but it does seem that after what has been a fairly bleak year for us all, we're getting to a better place. So in broad terms, I don't want to steal Tim's thunder. We're in good shape. We'll sustain the shape of our focus going forward with partner agencies. Tim can give us a couple more specifics in terms of the approach.
Okay, Commissioner, as you know, ACC partly is leading for COVID on behalf of the force, but as you know, we're a key partner in this within the Local Resilience Forum, so that's the local authorities, Public Health England, and a whole range of other partners working together to structure the local response to COVID across South Yorkshire. Clearly the focus of the Local Resilience Forum now is the rollout of mass vaccinations. As those vaccinations start to roll out, both before Christmas and in earnest into the new year, we'll play our part in assisting the local health officials to come up with a plan of mass vaccination centres and ensuring the security of those centres and all that you'd expect of us. In terms of the impact here and now, the force has continued to enjoy very low abstraction rates and the force has continued to provide the full policing service. It's been unaffected by COVID, and the way I would describe it is that we are seeing nothing more than normal sickness levels across the force, which are pretty low anyway. The impact of things like lockdown is that not as many people take leave from work, as you can imagine. So service continues unabated, and the manage from the process of moving from the national lockdown into tier 3 has been managed very smoothly. And I know that mention has been made before of what we call our CMART team, Compliance Multi-Agency Response Team, where we work with partners to ensure that we deliver compliance and regulatory enforcement in line with the 4Es approach that we've articulated before. What we've seen throughout the national lockdown was a continual rise in the number of reported COVID-19 incidents, but that growth has now slowed over the past couple of weeks. But just to give you a feel in terms of numbers, so from the 24th of October, the force has recorded 3,924 incidents tagged as COVID-19 incidents, and to just give you a feel, that's 704 in Doncaster, 704 in Barnsley, 899 in Doncaster, 702 in Rotherham, and 1,620 in Sheffield. We've always taken a robust 4Es approach, so this is about engaging with people, educating them, and undertaking that before we move to enforcement. As a result, we've issued 655 fixed penalty notices across South Yorkshire since the 24th of October, 96 in Barnsley, 132 in Doncaster, 101 in Rotherham, and 326 in Sheffield. So we will continue to take that robust approach over Christmas. Planning for Christmas is different this year, not so much in terms of the resources that we have available, but in terms of our approach, on the basis that restrictions stay as they are, and even if there was a shift into a different tier, the impact on the nighttime economy is profound. So we don't see a busy nighttime economy that we would normally see around the Christmas period. So our planning will look at the issues around house parties and those sort of contingencies that we know that we'll have to deal with over this period. And the planning process is well underway, and we will be in a position to be able to deal with any issues that are forthcoming over the Christmas and New Year period. I think that's probably it. I think the best way to sum it up is that in terms of our resources, we're very comfortable where we are. We're working closely with the LRF. The number of COVID incidents is now starting to decline, and the focus of planning is very much towards implementing mass vaccination, but continuing to make sure that people abide by the regulations as that rolls out.
Thank you very much. That was a good summary as well. Thank you. So moving on to item 6, there are no items to be considered in the absence of the public and the press. Item 7, are there any declarations of interest that we don't know of? Item 8 then, minutes of the meeting of PAB held on the 10th of November. I'm assuming, unless someone wants to tell me otherwise, that we'll accept those as a true and correct record. There's just one alteration we need to make on page 9, Sally, paragraph 5. We've got the NCA down, well, we've got the NFA down as the NCA. We just want to do a little change around that. Everybody happy with the minutes? Matters arising, this is pages 13 and 14. Michelle, do you want to quickly take us through those?
Yes, Commissioner. The first one, 393, relates to the format of reports coming to PAB. That can be discharged now. We've worked up a template and we've got an approach for future reporting for district reports. 396 relates to the public space protection order consideration in relation to Page Hall, which is a local authority responsibility with Sheffield City Council. We haven't heard an update from Sheffield City Council, but you're going to do a letter, Commissioner, to the new leader of Sheffield City Council to chivvy that along a bit. The next one relates to, the next three relate to when reports are going to come forward on the work programme following reports that have been to previous meetings. The first one, 398, regarding restorative justice, we've agreed with the force that will be brought forward in February. The other two relating to those crimes affecting older people and cybercrime will be a year from when they came before, so November 2021 for those, Commissioner. And then all of those can be discharged apart from the public space protection order.
Thank you very much. Is there any question or comment around that? If not, thank you. Shall we move then to in the agenda to item 10? This is under force performance, and first of all we have a report from the Barnsley District Commander Sarah Pullman, who I think I can see on our list. Can I say, just before we get into the report, a couple of things. First of all, I think we should assume that everybody's read the report, Sarah, if you're introducing this, and I will just take you to a few things that have occurred to me as I've read it, and then at the end, if you want to pick up on anything else that you felt should be brought to our attention, I'll give you a chance to do that. Could I also say, in terms of the report itself, I thought this was a real joy to read, actually, because I thought it had a really good narrative flow to it, and it read easily, it read very well. It was jargon-free, mainly acronym-free, and the sort of report that the member of the public could read easily, and I think that's the idea of these reports, because they do go onto our website. So thank you very much for that. I only found one spelling mistake, which is the second word, but apart from that, thank you very much. Sarah, is it you introducing?
It is myself. Yeah, good morning, Commissioner, and thank you for that feedback. I apologise, I've just spotted myself, so terrible by me. So would you like me to run through what I deem to be the key points, or would you like to start with your key points and then I'll cover it off from there?
I'm happy to do the former, and so I'll take you to a few things, shall I? And we'll see.
No problem.
So if we go first of all to page 16, and this is under protecting vulnerable people, the heading, and I'm particularly interested in what you've got to say here about domestic abuse. Because that's been a concern all the way through the time of the pandemic, the first lockdown, then the second lockdown, what was happening around that. And it did seem to me that the Barnsley team had done some really good work around this, made very good progress. You seem to have set up your specific domestic abuse team very early and found ways for victims to report in, despite all the difficulties of being locked in, possibly with their partners. So just something around what's happened during lockdowns and the restrictions to domestic abuse and the steps that you've taken in Barnsley to deal with that.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So you can see on the graph, figure 1, that we had a slight dip in April from where our normality, but actually not that different to February, but bounced back in May. And actually what we saw from the bounce back was actually we were pretty much consistently higher, so, not massive amounts, but 5 to 10% higher than we had been in previous months, which does indicate that there was a higher occurrence of domestic abuse during this period, and that that was being reported and recognised by the police, and victims were being taken seriously. So that's a positive. The victims felt able to report to the police even when under the restrictions as they were in the first quarter. And I can't take all the credit for this. Clearly, SYP as a force has taken the initiative back in April to ensure that we introduced further mechanisms to ensure that victims had all of the opportunities that they needed to report to police should they require it. So I reference in here the Silent Solution and our online portal, which has had some use, not a huge amount of use since it was introduced, but it does offer an alternative. And it's a clever development and a portal which disappears within seconds of being completed. So there's no ongoing threat to victims who have taken a couple of minutes away from their partner to submit that report. So it's a clever mechanism and has been used since its introduction. So I think it's a positive in terms of the maintenance of numbers, and certainly we're seeing a slightly higher level than we have done previously. As I've reported previously to PAD, we do have a strong structure around our domestic abuse, and this has been built up over the last 2 to 3 years. The one downside is due to COVID restrictions. We had IDAS co-location. So IDAS is our independent domestic abuse advocate service. They were co-located in the police station and had been for the previous year in an initiative that we introduced to ensure that we were giving fast time intervention to victims of DA within hours of the incident taking place, to support victims, to assist them in getting all of the safeguarding they needed, and to hopefully encourage them to support the police prosecution so that we were in a stronger position to end the cycle of domestic abuse. Now, the one thing that COVID has meant is that has had to stop. And we still haven't moved back to that position and probably won't until the next financial year for obvious reasons. But IDAS have continued their work, just not with us in the police station, but both parties agree that is our long-standing commitment. So hopefully we will get back to that when we get back to a sense of normality. We have continued to invest in the domestic abuse team. So we are at a much stronger position now in terms of numbers in the domestic abuse team compared to where we were in the previous financial year. And we aim to get to our full quota in January. So the task was that by April we would have the full complement in the DA teams based on the demand profile that was written last year. We will have that several months earlier in January with all of the staff. But what we're trying to do here is really embed that positive, proactive approach to domestic abuse throughout all of our teams. So we're not leaving the DA teams static. What we're doing is rotating younger cops through that DA team so that they are exposed to the skills and resources, the partnership resources that we know are available to us, so that they can then, when they return to their response teams, take those skills back with them and hopefully educate their colleagues around them, and eventually we'll get through everybody. So I think that's a real strength to our approach to domestic abuse, and really embedding that from the grassroots up around how seriously we take DA. And then finally, at 3.3, I've just given an overview of our outcomes. And I think our approach, our dedication and commitment to this, alongside our partners, is demonstrated in our action taken rate for domestic abuse, which, the lines are there for everyone to see, so I won't go through it in minute detail, but overall we're seeing between a huge uplift in our action taken, which is the orange line if you look at November last year. And then December, January, February, right through. So we're consistently over 20% now around domestic abuse, and have risen up to 25, 27%. Clearly it fluctuates, so to expect a completely stable picture on that would be unrealistic. But I'm happy that we've created a positive benchmark in terms of DA outcomes from which we seek to make marginal improvements and a continuous improvement, Commissioner. So, and I think that's well in hand. I have spent some time just explaining just the DDPOs and the Inspire to Change programme. Clearly that's changing as of next year, but we will continue to invest in any perpetrator programme that is available to us. So unless there are any other questions, I don't have anything more to add on domestic abuse.
No, thank you very much indeed. It's a pity that your co-location with IDAS has had to be suspended during this coronavirus period, because that clearly must be a very strong feature of the response to DA in Barnsley. Can I just ask you a question on that graph on page 17, the overall positive outcomes? How does, or perhaps you don't know the answer to this, but how does this compare with other forces, with the position nationally? Is this good, bad, or middling? I don't know.
To be honest, I don't have that information directly to hand. I think we're in a slightly stronger, what we've seen in overall outcomes, and Mr. Forber may be able to interject, but what we've seen over the last 12 months is an improving picture around South Yorkshire outcomes overall, so not just domestic abuse. And so we are now in a stronger position compared to the England and Wales average. So I think that would be, and I caveat that with some caution because I obviously have the exact figures to hand, but I think that's replicated in domestic abuse. So the progress made in the last 12 months is pushing us above the national average.
Commissioner, if I can perhaps assist on that one, is
Mark.
the data I think we need to be slightly wary about figures because there's a whole series of interdependencies. So to kind of give some reassurance before I do mention some figures is we recently engaged with the Safe Lives charity to deliver DA Matters training,
Yes.
which we think is a really important step for us, funded by the BRU. And certainly the feedback we got from them was that and they obviously were the forces across the country, they felt we were in a much better place than most. I think they recognised the emphasis we put on domestic abuse as one of our absolute priorities. And when we discussed our approach and the attitude of staff and the priority we gave it, he gave us some very reassuring feedback. We'd never be complacent about this because it is a priority for us, and it's a high volume, high crime, high harm crime, which is never a good combination. But just to put some pressure on it, the approach we took was that first of all, you've got to accurately report crime. So we looked at the statistics of when an incident came in reported as a domestic abuse incident, which may or may not turn out to be a crime because of the reporting thresholds. And then we looked at whether or not we recorded it as a crime in the first place. And that's really important because if you don't record it as a crime, you don't have the supervisory follow-up, it doesn't trigger the diversionary activity, either such as will inspire to change to tackle offending behaviour, or equally to safeguard victims and put in measures to support them. So I think when we look at the data, and these are rough figures, but I think probably 4 years ago we were turning around about 20% of domestic abuse incidents into crimes. That's probably now around mid 60%. So straight away, the volumes of crimes have gone up. Now, that could have a detrimental impact on your positive outcome rate because clearly if there's more crimes, there's more volume to deal with, and the numbers may dictate that you take a smaller proportion of action. That's not the case with us because we've tracked it through. We're reporting more crimes from incidents. We are taking more positive action in terms of arrests. And arrests aren't the only solution, but it's really important because, as we know, it gives victims breathing space to feel that they can take positive action. We can seek to put support, and we can start dealing with the offender. So that's seen a massive increase. And then on the broader piece with DBPOs, as Sarah related, we, I think, are probably the most proactive force in the country. I would hazard a guess at. We formed a domestic violence protection order team, which is a supervisor and 4 staff, just to make sure that we deal with that. So it's not necessarily a sanction, but it's an outcome where we can put steps in place to make sure that we keep the victims safe. So I think the numbers don't tell the whole story. I think our positive outcome rate, as referenced by Sarah, is probably one of the strongest in the countries. But it'd be wrong just to take that as an individual statistic, because it's the whole rounded approach that hopefully we've taken to domestic abuse.
Yes, thank you very much. I get that, and thank you for amplifying that point. I just think that in terms of domestic abuse, it is a strong position that is being referenced here, and thank you, Sarah, for what you're saying about the Barnsley position. Do you want to reveal yourself, or are you not able to do that?
No, I can do. Commissioner, apologies, it affects.
That's all right. Otherwise, I'm just sort of
the
at a blank screen all the time. But thanks. Oh, there you are. Can I take you to page 19 now, which is around mental health and complex needs? Again, with coronavirus, but not exclusively so, issues around mental health, I think, have come very much to the fore. I just wonder if you could say a word around that and what's been happening.
Yes, what we saw, it's difficult to give exact numbers around mental health because it presents in so many different ways, as I'm sure you're aware, and it affects policing demand for crime and non-crime, for missing people. So it goes right across the breadth of our policing of policing demand. But what we did see was during the first lockdown and post the first lockdown was an increase in Section 136 detention. So that's Section 136 of the Mental Health Act, where the police detain someone who is deemed to not be able to pose a risk to themselves or others. And we saw a rise in that. And I think and I think it's well recognised amongst the partnership, who obviously I'm working with on a daily and weekly basis, that mental health concerns are rising amongst the general populace. And this is no great surprise due to the isolation that many have been subjected to during the lockdowns, and it's not even just the lockdowns. We've got people that are shielding and have shielded for now 9 months. So if they're on their own, then that's a huge amount of time to be left with just your own mind. So we have seen an increase in our mental health demand. What I have seen here in Barnsley, and it's interesting, I get a lot of feedback from people who have suffered from mental health crises, who write in to acknowledge and recognise the work of the police officers that intervened in that critical moment. And I've given an example just here, which I received just a couple of months ago. What I think it shows is that the efforts that SYP have put into educating our staff around mental health illness, to recognise the signs of it amongst violence, so not just seeing someone as a violent offender, but actually recognising their underlying causes, that we are now able and skilled and equipped to deal with this in a far more compassionate way than we've ever been able to deal with it before. Which is why I think I'm getting these regular emails from people that have suffered, and it just shows how much impact that has on them, having someone who's friendly, compassionate, caring at that point at which they are contemplating suicide. So it's I get real reassurance from the regular contact I get from people that have been in those positions. And then just to reassure that obviously we're not just reactive around mental health, although a lot of our work is reactive. We're proactive through our Safer Neighbourhood Services Hub, where they look with the partnerships at those individuals within our communities that frequently are suffering from some form of mental health issue or illness. So they look at those individuals that are causing a concern to themselves, to others, putting a large demand on the emergence of the blue light services or our council colleagues. So we look at them and we have a problem-solving model clearly around those individuals. And so the hub are real assets, and really knowledgeable assets that can effectively deal with them. And they have a co-located mental health worker, which enables us to deal with that individual in a really holistic way, rather than just looking at them in silos in accordance with public sector kind of remits. So yes, I expect that we'll continue to see this increased demand around mental health for the next few months, if not longer. I think what we'll see is, even after, once we get to the end of the tunnel, to use the analogy that the boss was using earlier, we're going to see the aftermath and a longer term impact of COVID on mental health for the next year or so.
Thank you. Yes, and I note the comment that the young man made that you've put in para 3.8 there, and indeed you've done that at different points in the report. And I think that's been a really good way of getting a bit of colour, if I can put it that way, into the reports, and that's good to read. Can I take you now to page 320, and just very briefly in terms of response times, obviously you're getting something right here as well in Barnsley. I wonder if you just say something around that, because we've talked about response times in different districts, and it's whether you're able to do that without distorting your organisation, having to put resources into there to do the response, pulling them away from other things, whether it's leading to, or potentially leading to, any kind of perverse behaviour on the part of officers who feel under pressure to respond quickly. Could you just say a little word about that?
Yeah, of course I can. I think from my perspective, the focus around response times, ever since we started focusing on these a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now, has been about an appropriate ethical approach to this. Clearly, we want to get to victims as soon as we possibly can. Now, that is graded in accordance with the incident grading protocol in Atlas, and that determines how quickly we need to get to that particular scenario. What we see in our emergency response times, we weren't far off. But unfortunately, we were above the target time of 15 minutes. This is back in the beginning of this journey, so 18 months ago. And that's really been around just making sure that staff recognise the importance of getting there as quick as we possibly can without driving dangerously, without driving within their limitations, driving within the law. So emergencies there's been slight increases of a couple of minutes. So we were probably on our median average was 16 minutes, and we're now down to kind of 13, 14. So it's a case of a couple of minutes gain. But that can mean the world to a victim. So I'm not trying to diminish that increase or that improvement in response times, because it can mean the world to victims and their families. So that's been through just educating our staff, making sure that there is that sense of urgency, that they get out of the door and get there as soon as they possibly can in a safe way. So I can assure everybody that there has been no distortion whatsoever. We haven't changed the remit of the response teams. We haven't taken anything away in order to manipulate those figures. They are the same teams that have been doing this. This is just around focusing minds and making sure that we are as efficient and effective as possible in our response. The second is the priority response times, and that's where the greater gains have been made. And this is around making sure that we're managing it together with our colleagues in Atlas Court, that we're managing those priority cases effectively, that we're managing victim expectations, that we're through our resource management sergeants, so we call them RMS, so through those individuals that we're managing the resources effectively right across the district, that we don't have any artificial boundaries, because Barnsley, as I'm sure everyone is aware, but it's split into two phases for response teams, and making sure that there's no artificial boundaries between those two. So when there's a call over in the east side of our district, that we don't necessarily just let it wait if there are assets available in the west. So it's just making sure we have a one team approach to all of our demands, and that we're dealing with it effectively and intelligently, and in line obviously with what the victim needs and what the scenario needs. So I think I came at Christmas time last year, Commissioner, and predicted that we would probably be stabilising. And that's what you've seen throughout this year. And what I'm pleased to see is that, yes, we've stabilised, we've maintained those good response times without any distortion, and completely ethically and appropriately. In terms of priorities, I'll continue to make marginal gains, and we're talking small minutes now, but the focus is on keeping our response team response times in that really positive position, so that we continue to service the victims across our district.
Yeah, I think you're right. You must reach a point where improvements would be marginal, if at all, but sustainability was the important thing, and that's probably what we're seeing here. Mark, I think you wanted to come in. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sarah's exactly right about that, and I know she, as with everything, she approaches this with real rigour, but equally in an ethical manner as well. I'll just give you the reassurance across the force. Yes, we have put a lot of emphasis on a timely response, because if you're being the subject of a violent assault, if someone's breaking into your house, then expecting the police to get there within 15 minutes is what the least you should be able to expect. Now, previously, before we put emphasis on this, we were in cases, it was on the mean even, we were probably 6 to 7 minutes over that. So we've reduced it massively. As Sarah said, we've reduced the priorities. So across the force, we're probably an hour quicker now. When you bear in mind that target was an hour, and we've improved our performance by an hour, it gives you an indication of where we were and where we are. But as Sarah said, I think every time we've ever discussed this at force performance, the emphasis on this is it's not about officers driving faster. It's about understanding demand. It's about having the appropriate shift patterns, and it's about doing the in-house functions effectively. So when we break down the various stages of a call coming in from a member of the public, which will be into Atlas Court, receive it, take the information, assess it, create the job, dispatch an incident to district supervision to check if need be, then dispatch an officer. Where we look, we've made the most significant gains. It's in being efficient and effective at Atlas Court, but also on the districts. So we've squeezed the amount of time it takes for us to dispatch an officer, which gives the officer a greater opportunity to actually get there. Because I think previously when we looked at it, and Sarah will probably recall this, we were dispatching a job and an officer maybe only had 1 or 2 minutes to get there. Well, we're doing the officer to failure and putting them under pressure and not giving them the public service. So the position we're in now is far more efficient. I think Steve Kent may be on the line, and Steve has come to for his performance day just so he can hear it direct from me to make the point. This is not about driving faster, it's about being intelligent and deploying effectively. So there is that really strong message there. So it's a key part of the service to the public. There is a lot of emphasis put on it. I think we're really staying where we are now. I don't see any particular gains across the force. I think the fluctuations, as there always will be, but that's perfectly understandable. So I think we're into a position of maintaining a very strong position. And again, I think we're probably in a better position than most across the country.
Yes, thank you for that. And I take the point about ethical as well as proportionate and sustainability. That seems to me the message that you're trying to convey here, that you're getting across. Can I take you now to page 22 of burglary, residential burglary? This, you note that it's a priority for the public in the Barnsley district. It probably is across South Yorkshire. But certainly it's something that people will often talk to me about, residential burglary. I just wonder if you could say something about your, if I can put it this way, your burglary reduction plan. You talk about 7 teams and 3 priorities. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, of course. So we've had a couple of good years in terms of reducing residential burglary. And again, I tried to explain that it's a confusing position for members of the public, because when we talk about residential burglary, we're not just talking about house burglary, we're talking about sheds and outbuildings, which is as part and parcel of the Home Office crime recording standards. So just to explain, there is a differential between house burglary and residential. So we saw a couple of positive years where we've been seeing some reductions, and I'm not going to hide from the fact that the first lockdown we did see a substantial reduction. So from April through to May, Q1, we saw a substantial reduction in residential burglary. But what has come out of this is that we were able to maintain those low levels even as we merged in through June, July, August. So we're seeing a positive picture for this year too. We have always had a burglary plan. We continuously refresh it to make sure that it's alive and that it's doing what it needs to do. The last refresh being only in October, 2 months ago, where we looked at how everyone interacts. So obviously policing is made up of quite a diverse group of portfolios, all with different remits and objectives. But what we're trying to do with burglary is make sure that everyone is clear about what their role in reducing and detecting burglary is. So we created a 7x3 plan. So basically you have the 7 portfolios, which are the kind of key portfolios across Barnsley District, and the 3 key things that everyone within those portfolios should be doing to reducing burglary. And we've really driven that through our daily management processes, through we have proactive hotspot patrols in our key areas every single night. We are engaging with our force assets, so our roads policing team in particular, because Barnsley, we are susceptible to cross-border crime, as many areas are, but we have a lot of travelling criminality down the M1 from West Yorkshire, right across the Pennines from GMP. So we're very conscious of that. So actually trying to strengthen our control of the arterial road network is important in terms of reducing that travelling criminality. So as a result of the refresh plan, we have seen we've seen that really come together. And again, the big emphasis for me at Barnsley is that we work as one. We are one team, and although you might have slightly different priorities and remits, that shouldn't prohibit you from working effectively with your colleagues, bringing us really together to focus on the things that matter the most to our public. So as a result of the refresh of the plan, we had a spike of burglary, and that will be evidenced in the next quarter's data, Commissioner. But we did have a spike in October from really, really healthy figures right through the summer months into September. But we reacted to that quickly, swiftly, made sure we had that plan in place. And ever since then, we've seen reducing figures. And I'm pleased to say we're back down to below where our norm from 2019 is now. So a slight spike, but it just shows you when you pull everyone together, focus the assets where they need to be with intelligence-led policing, you can achieve what you need to achieve. So yes, it's positive news on the residential burglary front.
Can I take you now to page 23? This is drug dealing, because again, this is one of those things that members of the public in the Barnsley district reference whenever I go to or do our remote meetings these days or engage with people. And in para 4.8, you talk about 62 people being arrested for drug dealing, 29 warrants and so on. If you could say something around it, these are high numbers, are they? And of arrests?
I think that they are, because that's drug dealing, that's not just possession. So that would be what we deem possession with intent to supply, or production, or supply itself, conspiracy to. So these are crime types that are not just simple possession. Obviously, if we included simple possession, it'd be much, much higher than that. And what I've presented, I think, at the last PAB, around a lot of the proactive work we did throughout the summer months, particularly around an OCG that was engaged in large-scale cannabis cultivation right across our district, right across South Yorkshire, and frankly across the north of England. So we've been very successful at dismantling that OCG. A number of them are now in prison, and the others have disappeared from our patch. Now that's obviously we want to prosecute because that's how you achieve the longer term public protection. However, there is inevitably with any kind of proactive work there's going to be some displacement. But what is important is that we link in with our adjoining forces. And I think it's fair to say we have a very close working relationship with West Yorkshire, and regularly on a daily basis speak to their intelligence department. So we are making sure that we're feeding that into the bigger picture, so that we're not just kind of turning and running and letting our drug dealers move elsewhere without sight of the local police force. So there has been throughout the summer months, and I think it's available in all of the data that's been revealed, that there's been a higher number of drug offences, not only in Barnsley but right across the force, recorded since April 2020. And there is an element of not only the focused proactive work around drug dealing in line with our local priority, but there's also an element of, certainly during the first lockdown, we had a reduced level of kind of traditional crime types. So we saw less theft, we saw less burglary. So there was an opportunity for officers to be a bit more proactive, and be able to stop cars more frequently than they would otherwise have been, because they're not being demanded to go to the next incident on the log. So what that meant is that we were able to, on nights in particular, pick out the cars that were just looking a bit more suspicious, carry out searches appropriately and ethically, and frequently now what we're finding is that overnight we're getting, through our response teams doing that proactive work, we're getting a number of individuals in with for possession with intent to supply, which is exactly what I want them to be doing, and because ultimately it disrupts. It seeks to prosecute those individuals that are travelling around my district, selling drugs, predominantly Class A drugs, to vulnerable people within my communities, which then goes on to fuel crime. So whatever we can do to continue to focus on drug dealing is absolutely imperative in my view. So we can compare numbers. I haven't done it in this report, Commissioner. I can do if you wish me to, but look at the numbers we've done previously in previous years. But I would expect there to be an uplift in certainly since April for the reasons I've articulated.
Thank you. Yes, we might want to come back to that at some point, but thank you for that. On page 24, thank you for, I won't ask you to comment on this, but I'll just comment myself. It's around speeding, tackling local priorities, speeding 4.10. Just say thank you for all the work that's been done around the Dearne Valley Parkway. That causes a lot of concern recently, but people have been very grateful for the action that the force has been taking there. Going on to page 25, this is treating people fairly, one of the 3 priorities of the police and crime plan. You made reference there, it's just underneath the diagram, to a community challenge board, and I wonder if you could say what that is and what's happened to it during this coronavirus period.
So the Community Challenge Board we had in place here for, I think 3 or 4 years, possibly even before my time here in Barnsley. It's a group of local residents, individuals that are interested in providing feedback to the police. They meet on a monthly basis and they look at certain crime types. They tend to focus on hate crime, but more recently in the last year, 2 years, they've been looking at stop search as well. So those areas where we're concerned which give an indication around tensions within our communities, concerns around disproportionality. So they look at our records and give us feedback. They have been meeting, but far less regularly than they would previously have done. But obviously, most of which of those meetings have been taking place online. But they've still fulfilled that function for us, and we're really grateful for their commitment because it really adds to our perspective. It gives us a different perspective on some things. And what is useful, in particular around hate crime, obviously I have a personal interest in hate crime. What they do is they'll look at hate crimes and feed that up into the IAG. So the IAG will have a view and hold us to account around any concerns they may have around how we have dealt with a specific hate crime case or stop search case. So there is a route for escalation as well through our IAG to the superintendent, who obviously chairs or co-chairs the IAG.
Thank you. I hadn't come across it before, which is probably remiss on my part, but good to have that. Thank you. I think that's everything. Right. I think that's everything, Sarah, that I wanted to ask you about the report. Was there anything that you felt you wanted to draw to our attention that it hasn't come up, or you may not? I'm not inviting you to.
No, I think we've covered the key issues through, obviously all of these are our priorities. I know Mr. Forber gave a view on COVID, which I have done from a local perspective at the end at 5.3. I'm really grateful to the officers and staff in Barnsley who have shown incredible resilience throughout this entire period. We've always had very low abstraction levels, and that's a testament to their commitment and dedication, and I'm really grateful for that because that has enabled us to continue our full spectrum policing right throughout this pandemic. And I'm proud of what they've achieved, Commissioner, so I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you again for did you write the report, Sarah, or did you write it, the report?
Yes, I wrote it.
Thank you very much, because I thought it sets a good example for us all, and not quite middle March, but not far off, I thought. Thank you.
Looks like I've got a new career in the making. Thank you.
My comments haven't trashed your career with South Yorkshire Police, but it was easy to read, and thank you for that. Okay, if everybody's happy with that, then shall we move to item 11, which is in the name of Tim Forber, pages 29 to 48. This is Force Performance Report against the Police and Crime Plan, and it's the treating people fairly priority in the plan. Tim, if I can do the same with you, if I can ask you 1 or 2 questions, then see whether there's anything that we've missed that you particularly wanted to comment on. So if I start on page 30, if that's all right. This is police officer numbers and recruitment and so on. I wonder if you could just say a word about how that's going.
Yeah, Commissioner. Obviously, you'll see from paragraph 3.4 that the force is committed to recruiting 1,400 officers over the next 3 years. That in itself is a huge logistical challenge, because over the preceding period and throughout austerity, as you can imagine, when we're not recruiting many at all, our training infrastructure and recruitment infrastructure has shrunk accordingly. So we've been planning for this for some time now. There's been an awful lot of effort being put into it, everything from our recruitment teams through to expanding our training scheme, through to expanding our training facilities over at Robert Dyson House over near Mexborough. And all of that infrastructure is in place now. And we've just had a recruitment campaign. I understand that we had something like about 1,600 applications as a result of the most recent campaign. You will be aware now that the way that we train police officers has changed in terms of what the first couple of years used to look like. We've moved to, I suppose, a twin track approach now, where people either join as a high level apprentice on a 3-year probationary period, or apply as a degree entrant to the service, which involves a 2-year training programme. Irrespective of which, at the conclusion of that training programme, every candidate will have a degree level qualification as part of the apprenticeship programme. They get a degree qualification at the end of it. It's going very, very well, and certainly the quality of recruit that we're getting is very, very strong. And I know that from personal experience, because myself and all the chief officer team do actually involve ourselves in undertaking recruit interviews occasionally, just to make sure that we can be confident in the quality of the individuals that we are recruiting. We take that very, very seriously, because 80% of the budget of South Yorkshire Police is spent on people. So the quality of our people is absolutely essential to delivering the sort of police service that the public expects. So, in summary, it is going well. It's a very, very busy place. Our training school at the moment, that has continued throughout COVID, and that's brought an extra set of logistical challenges to be able to train people in a COVID secure way. And we have had instances where, doubles of student officers have had to self-isolate because of issues around COVID symptoms and COVID positive tests. But we've managed that very well through provision of online training and people Skyping in, and it's all going as smoothly as we could hope.
Thank you. And it's your paragraph 3.4 there. It is worth reminding ourselves that we had already committed to increase police officer numbers before the government's 20,000 offer. So our 220 officers, I asked Debbie Carrington yesterday, how many of those have we had in? So in 2019 to 2020, we had 50 officers that were as a result of our local initiative here in South Yorkshire. We've got 73 going through this year, and then the rest to come. So it's quite a strengthening of numbers across South Yorkshire, both the local effort and the national effort.
Tim, if I could perhaps just sort of add to that, is that often, there's many headlines go around about 20,000 extra police officers nationally, of which you'll see in the report 487 are on South Yorkshire allocation, but that's only one part of the story. As you quite rightly point out, was the extra officers that we'd already agreed as a result of change programmes within the force and preset discussions with yourself, and that's on top of we need 780 officers just to replace, to stand still. So it's a huge logistical effort.
Yes, I think that 779 officers to be replaced as a result of retirement and so on, I mean, that in itself is a big number, isn't it? So then to have to find more for the additional, the overall increase is a big ask, I think. Can I take you to page 31 and paragraph 316? A lot of people are saying to me, well, if there are more officers coming, what's our share in Doncaster rather than Sheffield and so on? And I think it'd be helpful just to say a word about the resource allocation formula, how that works and how that leads to the distribution of the resources that we have.
So we have a resource allocation formula that has a number of different indices that go in around population size, crime levels, both historical and future predicted. But as you can imagine, as the force grows, this is not just simply about saying that we'll stick however many at Doncaster, however many at Sheffield, however many at Barnsley. It's because there's obviously many diverse parts of the organisation, some of which the public don't necessarily see. So we've undertaken a strategic planning process where we look at the extra posts that we're going to be able to create and where we might create them. So, for example, we have put in the past year an extra 30 posts into public protection, detective posts that deal with child abuse, that deal with domestic abuse. These are not what the public will see in terms of extra uniforms walking around the streets of South Yorkshire, but are absolutely vitally important in terms of delivering an effective service to the most vulnerable. You heard Sarah talk about the challenges that she faces in Barnes, and to be fair, are faced by all our districts around criminal use of the roads, particular cross-border criminality, along the strategic motorway network. Well, one of our investments in the next financial year will be in a road crime team, a specific team dedicated with the proper equipment to be able to tackle organised criminals using the roads. Other examples would be the provision of a territorial support unit that can support the delivery of neighbourhood policing in terms of surging capacity and moving around the force. So whilst I run an establishment deployment board that works to a resource allocation formula and works to make sure that we have sufficient officers in each of the 4 districts, there's this complex level of complexity that lies over it in terms of it's really important that we create the infrastructure that can allow neighbourhood policing to get on with the job, because our model of policing here in South Yorkshire is absolutely preventative policing in neighbourhoods, local policing that consults with the local community, finds out what the local priorities are and does something about it locally. And to enable that to happen, you have to have an infrastructure that sits around it to deal with everything else that's going on. So it's a complex picture. I hope I've tried to explain it as articulately as I can. But that's how we decide based on our, both a resource allocation formula, professional judgments around how we will continue to expand the force over the course of the next 2 years.
And I think that's very helpful, and I think we've got to find ways of explaining that to the public, because I think when they see that figure of 20,000 additional officers in their mind, it equals 20,000 more in uniform on the streets in that way. Whereas, as you've said, there have to be specialist teams, otherwise they can't do the neighbourhood teams simply can't do their job.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Can I whip you on to page 33?
I could just put the
And
microphone on.
this is around issues around demographics and disproportionality and one thing and another. On page 33, paragraph 330, I mean, I have my own views around the use of census data as a means of comparing what's happening now. I just do not think that's the right comparator to use to compare the ethnicity, for example, of South Yorkshire now with what it was in 2011. Just seems to me to be not the right road to go down. But I accept that that's the way the Home Office and other bodies work. But you reference in there, it's the next paragraph, actually, 331, that Sheffield Hallam University is undertaking research about population data, and they're using their own research methodologies. Do we know anything about that?
I'm not cited on the precise detail of it, but I know that they are looking at a range of different indices to try and make, I think, gain a better understanding of what is the diversity within our population in South Yorkshire now, and most importantly, how that's likely to change over the foreseeable future. I can see that the deaf has just switched on his camera, so he may be able to give you a little more detail around it.
I mean, my not a gripe exactly, but the thing about methodology is if you're going to compare what we have today with what South Yorkshire looked like in 2011, that's a long time ago, that's 10 years ago. So that was only one of the difficulties I had. The other one was comparing the entire population of 2011, that's from 0 to 100 years of age, with a group of people who are involved in criminality. That also seems to me to be wrong as well. We need to compare smaller cohorts now with whatever period you're choosing. So I've got a double sort of gripe about this. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, part of this arose out of a conversation at your independent ethics panel, Commissioner, when we discussed the stock search data and other things. And one of the members certainly made the point that from education data, when you look at the age profile of people more likely to be searched, it's a younger age group. And we were quoting that the census figures would suggest that in South Yorkshire, the DAME population around 11.9%. But one of the members made the point that from schools data, it would probably suggest that in certain areas of Sheffield, for example, the BAME population is probably more akin to 30%. So it's the point you make that you're comparing different parts of the county on data that's quite old, and in some ways it could say that actually we're more proportionate in our use of stop and search. But then again, for those areas, that might set the bar higher for us if we want the quality in terms of our recruitment profile. So I think it's just breaking the data down, and I think you're right to be cautious about the very large single county-wide figures, because it can be disproportionate either way for various parts of the county.
Yes, I think we've just got to get a bit more sophisticated. Otherwise, we might be beating ourselves up unnecessarily in some areas, and we might need to look more closely at other areas of alleged disproportionality. They're the only points I'm making. But we'll see what Sheffield Hallam University come up with then. On to page 37, Tim, a bit of a leap.
Yeah.
It is 3.46. And it's talking about leavers, and particularly around BME, VME officers and staff leaving. And there seems to be an issue there around more BME staff officers leaving. I just wonder whether any work had been done around that as to why that should be the case, whether you're able to form any opinions around that.
I think the challenge we have, Commissioners, because the numbers are so small, to form any firm conclusions from it. What I'd say is that we do offer the opportunity of exit interview with all our staff, so we can pick up any issues. But I'm certainly not aware of any long-term concerns that's highlighted.
Okay. On to page 39 then, and this is around the culture of the force. And I just wonder if you could say something around para 3.58. Probably you had a senior way day, whether you'd formed any views in that would be of interest to us. And I wondered whether you'd thought of involving the independent ethics panel, and particularly Anne McCaskill, who I think is on the line, in any of this self-appraisal. Otherwise, it can look a bit as if you're marking your own homework. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think let me set it in context. Over the past 4 years, the force has made really significant improvements in its overall performance, and those changes that have been wide-ranging, and in certain instances have happened pretty quickly. We talk a lot about leadership style and leadership behaviour that delivers that sort of change, and because we spend 80% of the budget on people, and people are without a doubt the most important factor in delivering improvements in performance. The leadership and the style of leadership is a critical factor, and we make no apologies for it. There's been very much a pace-setting style of leadership where we myself and the Deputy Chief Constable and the entire Chief Officer team have been pretty specific about areas that we want to improve, and you heard today about response times. We've talked about our approach to domestic abuse. We, I suppose, have always had one eye on what's got us to this point, what's got South Yorkshire Police from being a force that requires improvement across the board to a force that's seen as good and exemplar in some areas that other forces come to find good practice. Isn't necessarily what will get us to the next level, and certainly I think there's some evidence, if you look at some of our staff surveys, about emotional energy amongst our staff. I think there's a risk at times that concerns us around burnout, and we, I think, want to see over the next few years a culture where certainly our sergeants and inspectors feel more empowered to deliver themselves, and that comes down ultimately to culture. So we've engaged the services of Mark Kilgallen, an external consultant who's well known through policing circles, and he's worked with many police forces as well as extensively in the private sector, to look at leadership style, to look at both a team and individual level, and look at how that needs to adapt. Now, this is not about a wholesale change, because what we've done and the way that we've delivered it has had a strong ethical basis and has delivered really strong results. But it is looking about how we empower our staff moving forward and how we take the organisation to the next level over the next couple of years. I don't know, Mark's put his camera on again. I don't know if you want to add to that, Mark.
No, I think you've covered it all pretty much. So it is just that point that, we've worked really hard, and when organisations work hard, achieve results, you either sit back and think, job done, or you think, well, where do we go next? And this is entirely consistent. Obviously made a massive investment with naval completing, problem solving training, innovation station. So this is just a further build on that to make sure that all our staff contribute in the fullest possible way. So it's just another build on that.
And I don't think, Commissioner, what we're saying is that we are looking at our leadership culture to say that that's wrong. When we talk about work on the force culture, it is very much about, I think the way I've summed it up is what has got us to here from the depths of where we were in 2015-16 is not necessarily what will get us to be an outstanding force by 2022. And it's about us taking stock of where we are and making sure that not just us as a chief officer team, but leadership at all levels throughout the organisation feels empowered to innovate, to be able to take responsibility and ensure that we can continue to deliver the changes for the good of the public.
Thank you, Tim. I think Dr. Billings may have lost his signal. He's just telephoned me. Commissioner, are you back on? No, he's just asked me to stand in and take us through the reports, if that's okay, Chief Constable, until he's able to rejoin.
Of course it is, no problem.
Michelle, should I talk a little bit about the remaining pages of this report or the specific questions that you wanted to ask?
I think that that completes the areas that the Commissioner wanted to go into, Tim. So unless there's any areas you wanted to highlight.
I think all I've just to talk about a little bit is about, on page 41, we talk about the welfare of us and the well-being of our staff. And you've heard on numerous occasions today, both the Chief, myself and Sarah Pillman talk about the resilience our workforce has shown, particularly throughout the COVID months. And, we should never lose sight of the fact that throughout this period, our officers, and particularly our frontline officers, are out there day in, day out. They are at risk of COVID as much as anyone working in frontline services. But the resilience that they've shown, the absence levels have been as low as I've known them in 25 years of policing. So their well-being is really important. We've definitely seen signs of strain because you look at we've engaged various surveys which show about the impact on emotional energy, the sense of feeling psychologically and emotionally drained. I just want the Commissioner to understand we take that deadly seriously. And again, you'll hear me say it a lot, 80% of the budget is spent on staff. If staff don't feel good, if they're feeling drained, if they're feeling emotionally tired, that has an impact on productivity. So, things that we've put in place, investment in, for example, force gyms, in wellbeing rooms at work, investment in online self-help, investment in our occupational health, use of what we call TRIN, but that's managing the trauma after particular incidents. We do it, and we do it extensively, and we continue to do it. We continue to invest in that, and we've only just had, conversations at SCT yesterday about an online magazine dedicated to well-being. So we take it deadly seriously because our people are really, really important. Then it's those individuals and their well-being that continue to deliver for the communities of South Yorkshire. That's it from me.
Tim, thank you. DCC Roberts, you wanted to come in, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Just when we talk about the welfare of people, one thing I think we may have mentioned before is about the trend for increasing assaults on officers. So if we look at the period between March and November and compare it like for like, we have seen some increase in fines. But you'll know that we're really well scrutinised and have good transparent process around our use of force. So our use of force during that period has actually decreased by 6%. The worrying thing for me is that assaults on officers have increased by 30%. And we bandy numbers around sometimes. That means that 16 of our officers are being assaulted every week. And that's obviously a significant increase. So it is a cause for concern. As of course, we take it really seriously. We get flagged to the command team. There's an expectation that we look after the welfare of our people, but also we prosecute the offenders. And obviously we look to see guests in the courts to make sure that we get support for that, because 16 officers being assaulted a week when they're out there to protect the people of South Yorkshire is just not acceptable. So I think it is just worth pointing out again the sacrifices that our people can make, and the fact that they put themselves in harm's way to look after the public.
Yes, DCC Roberts, I think the Commissioner appreciates that and acknowledges the mammoth effort that they've made and the pressure they're under on a day-to-day basis. He's raised that specific issue with the Policing Minister, and he chairs, as you know, the Local Criminal Justice Board, to echo your comments around seeing those cases through the criminal justice system so that those offenders are, when they're found guilty, are appropriately punished for that. Thank you very much. I think ACC Fulber and Chief, we're ready to move on to item 12 now then. Unless the Commissioner's joined us, I'll carry on to introduce that. Commissioner, have you managed to rejoin? No. Okay, so item 12 is the services for victims of crime. That's badged as a report of yourself, Chief Constable, but it's supposed to be a report from our office. And I think that this is going to be led by Sharon Baldwin from the office that's done a bit of evaluation and scrutiny work in relation to this area. Sharon, are you on the call?
I am. Good morning, Michelle. Good morning, everybody.
Sharon, could you put your camera on so that we could see you if you're able to, please?
I certainly can.
Thank you very much. Sharon, if you assume that people have read it, but just take us through the headlines, how it came to be, and what the result is, are obviously the key things. Thank you.
Okie doke. So in March of this year, right at the beginning of March, I presented a report to Public Accountability Board, which provided an overview of the commission and assurance work that had been carried out by the OPCC in support of victims of crime. The work included initial compliance with the Victims Code of Practice, and as a result of that, a number of suggested areas of focus were shared with service providers and key agencies that support victims of crime. You'll see that they are contained within the report and as an appendix. I think, obviously, the previous report to the board highlighted the importance of listening to the views of victims and survivors so that we can understand their needs and ensure that services are able to meet those needs. I think it's fair to say that obviously since that original report was shared, the population has been significantly impacted by COVID, and as a result of that, organisations have kind of needed to adapt very quickly in order to continue to support the victims. I think there's kind of three things that I just wanted to touch base on, if I may. I think the first thing is some of the excellent work that has been done by the force since that original report was shared in relation to kind of work around the compliance with the Victims Code. Temporary Chief Superintendent Steve Chapman, who leads on the complete victim care element, has, with colleagues in force, developed a complete victim care framework. And the kind of clear message of victim focus is really embedded through the force's delivery and subject to quite a lot of scrutiny, actually, through various operational governance. The key three principles really around that are the kind of early contact with the victim, agreeing a contact schedule with them and sticking to it, and providing them with support in terms of contact details for support services, etc. So lots of progress, and that's not the only thing. There's lots and lots of things that have happened. There's a force-wide hate crime scrutiny panel, continued kind of victim satisfaction surveys, and in fact, as well as the kind of core crime types, the force is starting to look at some other crime types in terms of victim satisfaction surveys. So yeah, lots has happened, and I just thought it was important to kind of share some of that progress. I think the next point really is the fact that the Victims Code itself has been subject to some revisions, and they were shared by the MOJ in early November actually, so only a couple of weeks ago. That doesn't come into being until April 21, which will allow organisations and service providers to embed, understand what that looks like in terms of those 12 key rights, because they're referred to now as rights of victims, not entitlements as they have been formally. So there's some time for organisations, and the force is included in that, to kind of think about what that looks like and how those are embedded, and if there are any particular changes. So that's the second thing. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on the fact that it's very much recognised that COVID has had a real impact on those victims and survivors, and particularly those that are pending court-related matters. And I know you referred to the work of the local Criminal Justice Board in South Yorkshire, and the Criminal Justice Board commissioned a piece of work very recently, which is focused on understanding the experience of victim witnesses as a result of the delays at court, and the changes that are experienced not just by the victims but actually by the services that are supporting those victims and survivors during their journey. So I think it's fair to say have had to adapt processes and seen a real increase in demand to make sure that those victims are regularly updated. So lots happening, and just wanted a chance really to kind of provide a bit of a progress update.
Michelle, you'll see that I'm back.
I didn't see Commissioner, but that's welcome news, of course. I was just going to see whether the Chief or a Force colleague wanted to come in on the back of the revised victim code work and the Force's response to that hasn't already been covered by Sharon, but she has mentioned that. We've already mentioned domestic abuse matters, the DA matters training, the DEP mentioned that earlier. And we've got a Criminal Justice Board meeting in January, of course, for Sharon to update on that victim assurance work she's doing in relation to victims in the criminal justice system. So that's where we've got to, Commissioner.
Thanks very much, and my apologies for that. Apparently my signal is still a bit dodgy, so it may happen again, but I dropped out for a little while there. So thank you for those who picked that up. Chief, was there anything, or Mark, anything you want, or Tim, anything you wanted to add to any of this?
I don't think so. As Michelle has mentioned, we have talked to some of the issues that we might otherwise have referenced in this piece. Suffice to say, there is a continued endeavour in terms of bringing the very highest quality of care to victims of crime and social behaviour and the like. And it goes without saying that remains very much at the forefront of almost the fundamentals, if you like, of what we're about.
Thank you. Sharon, perhaps I could ask you, the Force can't be that far away, can it, from the new Victims Code?
Just saying, Commissioner, that there's a period of embedding of the revised Victims Code. So although the revised version was launched in November in terms of those changes, obviously organisations and service providers need a period of time to understand them and what that means. And so it's kind of over to those service providers to now look at that, to understand what those 12 key rights of the victims look like, and what that might mean in terms of any changes for services, to make sure that victims be supported in the. I think having looked at that revised code, it certainly feels to me very much more simplified. I think it will be easier for victims to understand what they are, what those rights are, and what they're entitled to, right up front.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think that's everything then, probably on item 12. So item 13, PCC Strategic and Financial Planning Update. Sophie, pages 57 to 60. Is Sophie on the line?
I am, Commissioner. I'm sorry about that. I was trying to get my mute and my video off.
Oh, that's all right. We're all struggling with that one.
Yeah, this is a report that just shows us where we are in relation to the process itself. So I don't propose to go into it in a lot of detail, but just to say that the report outlines the background around the process and what we do every year in terms of looking at or having monthly planning and efficiency group meetings, which starts, well, they're every month, but the budget round normally starts in about September. We have inclusion from the Chief Constable's assessment of policing need, where the Chief identifies how the need will be met, and then we identify how much that is going to cost. We have to obviously wait for the announcement from central government around the settlement, and this year the comprehensive spending review, as people will be aware, announced that there wouldn't be any public sector pay awards for this year, except for doctors and nurses and those that were earning less than 24,000 who will get £250. So that's something we've had to factor in. And we're expecting it to be quite a difficult settlement when it comes out, hopefully either the 16th or 17th of December, but it could be as late as Christmas this year. So we're expecting a flat cash settlement, which will be a real terms reduction for us, and we're working towards that. But at the moment, the current position is that we've started the process. We've got the assessment of policing need, and work is ongoing around a number of options, what we can look into and how that translates into the medium-term financial forecast and precept discussions. And we'll have further meetings over the next few months, which will firm up the plans and assess against the Home Office settlement when it eventually arrives. There is a bit in the report about the comprehensive spending review announcement and what that means to us, but I wouldn't propose to go through that particularly unless you want me to. And then the final piece is around public consultation and the strategy that the communications and engagement team are ongoing with to ensure that views of the members of the public are heard appropriately and properly throughout the budget discussions.
Yes, thank you. And that's going to be quite a tricky thing to do, I think, this year, talking to the public, getting their views on this, because on the one hand they're going to hear about extra police officers, and they'll hear a lot about that, I imagine, which sounds as if that everything's fine. If you can afford to have lots more officers, then everything else must be fine. Whereas in fact, in a sense, the rest of policing, it's going to be very tight indeed, and we're going to have to be looking for savings and so on. And that's a difficult message, I think, to convey to the public, but that's what we've got to do. Thanks, Sophie. Does anybody else want to comment at all? Debbie, are you happy there?
Yes, I think Sophie's covered everything really. I think just in relation to the savings that you talk about as well, I think it's probably worth noting that because of the police officer uplift, half of our budget is police officers' pay. And so when we're looking for savings as well, you can't touch the police officers' pay side of it. So that's half of the budget there straight away that you can't actually go near and find any savings from. So it just makes that position much more challenging.
Except, of course, that the government have found us savings from police officers' pay because they've frozen it. So
that is helpful. Yes.
That is helpful to us. It's not helpful to police officers, and not a very good reward, really, for all that they've done particularly during this coronavirus period. But there we are. Okay, Sophie, your mouth opened, but nothing came out.
It was just to draw attention, Commissioner, to the precept flexibility that's built into the comprehensive spending review as well, that there is a maximum allowed precept increase of £15 on a Band D property, which is sort of a typical property within, nationally, and that's how the banding is worked out. But there is an expectation from the government within the settlement that precept flexibility will be maximised. So I just wanted to point that out, that the figures the government have worked on are based around the £15 precept increase. So there would be a further shortfall if the precept was less than that.
In other words, it's almost an attempt by Whitehall to set the precept for us, because they're assuming you will do that. And if you don't do that, then you're not going to get the money which they're calculating that you should have in order to finance the uplift. So it's a difficult one. It's, precepts are supposed to be locally determined and locally set, but when you're put in that position, it makes it very difficult. And again, difficult to explain, I think, to the public what's happening here. We'll do our best to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment on the report? Okay, shall we move to item 14, which is PCC decisions? Is this Erica or yourself, Michelle?
It's me, Commissioner. There's been 12 decisions since the last meeting. All of those relate to phase 2 of the COVID-19 extraordinary funding. It's worth noting that the OPCC has secured £2 million worth of extra funding in relation to government funding made available to react to COVID, to be passed on to commission providers in relation to your responsibilities, and of course the force of being part of some of those bid applications. So there's been some good joint working to secure some of that funding, and the table there sets out where such funding has been spent. Not all of that 2 million, because we've had different pots for different things, but since the last meeting, those decisions have been made. So unless there's any questions, Commissioner, that's all I was proposing to say.
And a lot of that funding has gone to organisations in the voluntary sector involved with domestic abuse and sexual offences. So that's where the money's gone, and that's set out fairly clearly there for everyone to see. We have had quite a few little pots of money thrown at us this year. It has been an extraordinary year for that, and it meant that people in my office, in the Violence Reduction Unit, in South Yorkshire Police, have had to work very hard and very quickly to meet government deadlines, because this money doesn't just come to you. You have to make bids in for it, and they have to be they have to stand up to scrutiny by the Home Office and other departments, and that's put a huge amount of pressure on us, both to get the bids in the first place, to secure the funding, then to get it out to organisations, and indeed for those organisations themselves to be able to spend it within the time period, because most of this relates to the current financial year. So they've got to spend it by March the 31st. Now, you can take a view on this, whether this is a good way of distributing public funding. We're very grateful to have it, and we'll get it to the organisations, but it doesn't help you with long-term sustainable plans if you're in the voluntary sector. And if I have any criticism of the government during this period, it would be that it's made decision-making over the longer term much more difficult, and put those voluntary bodies under huge pressure to get those applications in, and for us all to secure the money from government departments. Okay, anybody else with any comments around that? If not, shall we then move to item 15, public views on the effectiveness of neighbourhood policing. Fiona, this is a report in your name, 65 to 68.
Hello, Commissioner. Yes, it is. I'm just trying to, there we go, switch my camera on for you. Yes, it's just a brief update report really on a report that came to PAB in July this year, which was around the neighbourhood policing priorities survey work that we did last year. And this is just really an update on some small steps that have been taken since then. We were unable to rerun the survey this year due to COVID. It was a face-to-face survey, and we went out and spoke to nearly 600 people. So due to circumstances this year, that work hasn't been able to go ahead. But we have continued to monitor public views and experiences via virtual meetings, some limited face-to-face meetings over the summer period. with communities and organisations, as well as through social media and public comment. What we have noticed is there has been a noticeable improvement with sort of the engagement between neighbourhood policing teams and the public, especially across social media, and that's very much appreciated by the public. Lots of great interaction going on there between them. We do false reports against 7 strands of neighbourhood policing through the False Trust and Confidence Board, which is attended by members of your office, and that's going forward under ICC4 at the moment. And we've recently ran a priorities survey, which within there some key headlines came out around neighbourhood policing and what people want to see. And as what's come up in previous reports, is that people still want to see a visible policing presence on their streets. That over half feel as safe as they did 12 months ago. ASB, so antisocial behaviour, and youth nuisance is a key concern amongst residents. We saw that sort of grow a little bit over the summer months. There's a large-scale confidence amongst the public around the police, how they will deal and respond to violent crime. The top priorities that came out that they want dealing with are drug dealing, domestic abuse, and regular patrolling of high crime areas. And there's also been a positive response to it, where there has been increased visible policing, and particularly noticeable around the Parsons Cross area, where police moved into a vacant house on the estates there. That went down really well. The next steps for us really will be to continue with the monitoring on this and tracking the progress through engagement, introducing the neighbourhood policing officers and feeding that back through the Trust and Confidence Group, and ensuring that's shared back into the communities as well, and that's fed into your police and crime plan for next year, so that the neighbourhood policing can continue to be shaped around the needs of residents.
I think it's probably worth saying, Fiona, that it's not, of course, a scientific survey. It's a snapshot, a moment in time with a number of people across South Yorkshire, but we have to be careful how we interpret some of this. I don't know that anyone in the force wants to say anything about this.
So I can just add on to that. On the survey, there was around 2,000 respondents there, and they were split across all 4 districts. We're doing some further analysis of that, so the survey contained a lot of free text boxes, which are difficult to analyse because it provides us with a lot of information, but it does give us a real feel for what people are saying. So we're just analysing that at the moment, and that will go through the Trust and Confidence Group and back to yourself shortly.
Yes, thank you. And I do note things like a growth in ASB and youth nuisance as a cause of concern by the public. Probably ought not to be surprised about that, given what's been happening with a lot of people off school, people locked up, and so on. But, yeah.
Commissioner, could I perhaps just add a few words to it?
Yes,
so, I mean, you're well versed in the investment that we've made in neighbourhood policing over the past few years. I suppose a particular note, and I know particular concern to the public is the number of neighbourhood police officers that work within their local area. As a result of the changes that we've made to the structure of the force over the past couple of years, virtually all those neighbourhood officers are in post now, with the exception of a final 24 posts that are going to be created by the 1st of February 2021. That will then give us our total complement of neighbourhood policing officers, and that will all be in place by the end of the financial year. At the end of this financial year, there's some important developments that are taking place alongside that. I suppose the first is the creation of a performance management framework for neighbourhoods. One of the questions that I asked when I came to this portfolio in March is just exactly how do we determine the effectiveness of a neighbourhood policing team. Now, obviously, one key measure of that is how the public feel, and it's always pleasing to hear a snapshot of a survey such as we've just done. But also, there's some key underlying performance measures about the effectiveness of problem-solving plans, about actual visibility on the ground, about the actual targeted activity that teams are carrying out on a day-by-day basis, and how they're feeding back to the public. So we've developed a performance management regime that's now just being implemented now, be fully operational within the new year. We've also undertaken a significant training programme for our neighbourhood officers. Been accredited by Skills for Justice. There's only one other force in the country that's done anything like it, and that's going to be rolled out to every neighbourhood officer with a rolling programme a continuation training throughout after that initial rollout. But that will encompass things like evidence-based problem solving about targeted activity toolbox, about actually really trying to understand the culture of neighbourhood policing and the importance of local engagement with communities. So we're accrediting all our neighbourhood officers in that way. We've just had our police now. 48 officers have come by the police now route into neighbourhood officers. They're just now landing in their neighbourhoods, so the public will see the benefits of that. 48 highly trained, very capable graduates that have been recruited specifically into neighbourhood roles. They're being deployed in our neighbourhood roles starting in the last week or two. And we're now currently in discussions about how we will recruit more officers in the next financial year by that route, so we maintain that flow of officers into neighbourhoods. So it's a very positive picture. Absolutely replace neighbourhood policing at the forefront of what we do, because we're absolutely convinced that's what the public wants, and that's what will deliver more effective community safety in the long term.
Yes, and it's worth saying that the restoration of neighbourhood teams, the growth in numbers of officers, these are over a relatively short period of time, so they need to embed and for then the public to notice that. But I must say some of the neighbourhood teams, they're getting really good at their use of social media and the way through alerts, the way they're informing people of what's happening, and that is very much appreciated. I know it is in the area in part of Sheffield where I live. So thank you very much for that. Anything else on Fiona's report? Okay, thank you very much, Fiona. Shall we go to item 16, the PAB work programme? Michelle, this is 69 to 74.
Yes, Commissioner, the only anomaly on this seemed to be that the stalking paper that said it was due in January, we're just doing some due diligence on that because it should probably be the 4th, but it may have to come off altogether and be deferred. I know ACC Forber and I have also talked about bringing neighbourhood policing forward, but that's later on in the year. So we'll work the work programme up beyond the 3 months that's traditionally given with the agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's the whole of the agenda, unless there's anything under any other business. If not, our next meeting is scheduled for the 11th of January in the new year. So if I don't see any of you, I'll see some of you, of course, but if I don't see any of you between now and then, can I wish you a very happy Christmas and a good new year?